Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
They always said I was the strong one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need anything. It was a backhanded compliment I got used to hearing somewhere around the time my little brother Jake started flunking out of high school and coming home smelling like beer and cheap weed. I got a pat on the back for straight A's and no trouble. Jake got hugs and warm casseroles for just having a rough time. That dynamic never changed. It calcified. The day everything snapped for me started like any other ordinary Tuesday. No dramatic music, no storm clouds, just the sterile hum of the bank lobby and the worn leather armrest sticking to my skin while I waited for the manager. I was there to finally access the trust Grandma Ruth had left me. She'd passed almost 2 years ago, and I hadn't touched the money since I wasn't in a rush. I'd been saving it for something meaningful. A second property, maybe, or a business idea I was still sketching out in notebooks late at night. That money was supposed to be a parachute, a legacy, and most of all, it was supposed to be mine. When the bank manager came back with a look I couldn't quite place, somewhere between apologetic and vaguely nervous, I knew something was off. He sat down carefully, like he was lowering himself into the seat of a roller coaster he didn't want to ride, and laid a stack of paperwork between us. He cleared his throat and said, "Elena, according to our records, the funds from your trust were disbursed last October." I blinked. "Excuse me?" He nodded. The account was fully withdrawn in 3 separate transactions. All legal, all documented. I can show you. And he did. Signatures, dates, authorization from my parents, who had been temporary custodians of the trust since Grandma passed. Something I'd agreed to at the time without hesitation. Back then, it had seemed like a formality. We were family, why wouldn't I trust them? The documents weren't forged. My parents had signed off on the withdrawals, citing family necessity clauses buried in the legal language. Apparently, Grandma hadn't anticipated betrayal when she set up the paperwork. Or maybe she had, and just hoped better of them. I drove straight to my parents' house with my stomach in a knot so tight it made breathing feel like a chore. The air was crisp, one of those early November days where you can see your breath, and the trees look like they're bleeding gold and rust. My mother answered the door wearing her usual cable-knit sweater and that too-tight smile she pulled out whenever she was about to serve up a guilt trip. My father was in the recliner, half watching some old Western rerun like nothing had changed. "I went to the bank," I said, skipping the pleasantries. She raised her eyebrows. "Oh? You took the trust, the entire inheritance. You drained it." She sighed as if I was telling her something inconvenient, like I'd found mildew in the shower. "Sweetheart, Jake needed help." It was delivered so plainly, so matter-of-factly, that I almost laughed. Instead, my jaw locked, and I could feel heat rising behind my eyes. That money was for me. Grandma left it for me. She would have wanted us to help him, my father chimed in from the chair, without even turning his head. "He was drowning, Elena." I could barely get the words out. "And you thought that meant you could steal from me?" Mom frowned like I was being dramatic. "You don't really need it like he does. You have your own place, a stable job. Jake, well, you know Jake." Yeah, I knew Jake. I knew his tendency to charm waitresses into free shots and ghost landlords after 2 months' rent. I knew he'd already burned through loans, family bailouts, and at least one girlfriend's savings account. And I knew that no matter how badly he messed up, he'd always land in their good graces. But what I didn't know, until that moment, was just how disposable I was to them. All those years of being the strong one, the one they didn't have to worry about, had turned me invisible. I left without yelling, without crying, without slamming doors. I didn't even say goodbye. I just got in my car, pulled into a gas station parking lot 10 minutes down the road, and sat there staring out at the highway, wondering when exactly I had stopped being their daughter and started being their insurance policy. Later that night, I dug through some documents Grandma Ruth had left behind. Letters, old photos, even a will she'd scribbled out in her own handwriting years before the formal one. There it was in her slanted cursive. Elena is the only one I trust to use this gift wisely. She's got the head and the heart. Let her build something beautiful. That hit me like a punch to the ribs. 2 days later, a small envelope arrived in the mail from my accountant, who'd started digging on my behalf. It had 3 photocopied receipts, all withdrawals, all within the span of 2 weeks. The account numbers matched. So did the dates. And next to each withdrawal line was a memo. Repayment for Jake's loan. First casino fund. Debt settlement. Oak Ridge recovery. Personal credit payment, Jake P. 80,000, 55,000, another 45. $180,000. My inheritance, my future, gone. And now I knew exactly where it went. I didn't cry, not even once. I just sat there at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold in my hand, staring at the paper until the ink started to blur. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't even angry in the loud, scream into a pillow kind of way. I was done. And that's when the idea first bloomed. Quiet, slow, but sharp. Not revenge, not exactly, just balance. A correction, the kind that makes people think real hard the next time they try to write someone off as the strong one. Because sometimes the strong one is just waiting for the right moment to prove they've been underestimated all along, and Thanksgiving was coming. The thing about betrayal is it doesn't arrive all at once like a slap across the face. It creeps in slowly, a shadow at first, until one day you wake up and realize the room's gone dark. In the days after I learned that my inheritance was gone, quietly siphoned away under the pretense of family necessity, I didn't rage or fall apart, not because I wasn't furious, but because fury required energy, and all I felt was hollow. It's a strange kind of fatigue when your own parents decide, without your knowledge or consent, that your future is worth less than your brother's recklessness. I didn't call Jake right away. I gave myself a few days to sort through what little dignity I had left, to rehearse what I would say without yelling or crying or sounding like the bitter older sister everyone always assumed I was behind closed doors. I didn't want to feed the narrative they'd already built about me, that I was too practical, too cold, too business-minded, as if it was some personality flaw that I knew how to take care of myself. When I finally did pick up the phone, Jake answered on the 3rd ring with his usual breezy charm, the kind of voice that always sounded like he was on speaker at a barbecue, laughing with a beer in one hand and trouble in the other. "Hey, big sis," he said, dragging the vowels. "Long time no—" I didn't let him finish. "We need to talk." There was a pause, just long enough for him to register that this wasn't a social call. "Okay, what's up?" "I know about the money, the inheritance. I know Mom and Dad gave it to you to cover your debts." Another pause, heavier this time. A sigh filtered through the line. "Look, Elena, I know this probably looks bad." I cut him off again. "No, Jake, it doesn't just look bad. It is bad. That money wasn't theirs to give." "They said it was a family decision," he replied, tone defensive now. "They told me you'd be fine, that you'd understand." "Understand?" I almost laughed, though it came out more like a scoff. "Understand what? That you gambled away your life and they took my future to pay for it?" He didn't answer right away. In the background, I heard what sounded like a television and then silence. Finally, he spoke, voice lower. "It wasn't just gambling. I was in a rough place. You don't know what it's like to feel that desperate." "No," I said flatly, because I learned early that desperation doesn't buy you a safety net. I made sure I never got to that place. "And you want a medal for that?" he snapped, suddenly indignant. "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to be the screw-up? I didn't ask to be saved, Elena. They offered. They insisted." "They offered my money," I reminded him. "And you didn't say no." He didn't respond. The silence this time felt final, like the sound of a door swinging shut behind you. I hung up first. There was nothing else worth saying. Later that night, I stood at my kitchen sink, rinsing plates I hadn't bothered to eat off of, staring out the window at the streetlights spilling across the sidewalk. I remembered the last real conversation I'd had with Grandma Ruth, 2 months before she died. We'd been sitting on her back porch, drinking sweet tea as the sun dipped low behind her garden. She told me she worried about Jake. that she hoped he'd get his act together, but she also said something else I hadn't fully understood at the time. "You carry the weight, Elena," she had said, her voice raspy but certain. "They lean on you because they know you'll take it, but you don't have to carry everyone forever." That line echoed in my head, like a warning I should have heeded sooner. The next day I visited my parents again. This time I brought no expectations. I wasn't looking for apologies, I just wanted to see how deeply they'd convinced themselves that what they did was right. My mother opened the door with that same tense smile, the one she used when hosting neighbors she secretly disliked. My father sat in his recliner again, television volume slightly too high, pretending he hadn't heard the knock. I didn't sit down, I stood in the doorway like a creditor. "I talked to Jake," I said. Mom nodded slowly, folding her arms across her chest. "We thought you might. He said you told him it was a family decision." Her eyes softened, like she was trying to coax a wounded dog. "Sweetheart, he was in real trouble. He could have lost everything." "And I did," I said, sharper than I meant to. "You just don't see it because I didn't scream about it." She took a step forward, reaching for my hand, and I pulled back instinctively. "You're so strong, Elena. You've always been—" "Don't," I snapped. "Don't turn this into a compliment. I'm not strong. I'm alone. And you made sure of that." My father finally spoke, gruff and dismissive. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be. It's money. You'll make more." "It wasn't about the money," I said. "It was about the choice. The betrayal. You had no right." He shook his head, already tired of the conversation. "You don't throw away family over a few dollars. One day you'll understand." No, I understood now more than ever. Family, to them, was a one-way obligation. My stability made me their fallback. My achievements, their insurance policy, and Jake's failures, just another family emergency for me to underwrite. I left again, this time with a strange calm settling in my bones. I wasn't going to fight them anymore. I wasn't going to beg for justice or demand respect. I was going to take something back. Something bigger than money. As I pulled into my driveway, headlights briefly illuminating the "For Sale by Owner" sign across the street from an old craftsman house 2 blocks down, an idea began forming in the back of my mind. A slow, steady flame, one that would burn clean. They had taken something from me. I was going to take something from them. And this time, they'd never see it coming. There's a particular clarity that comes after betrayal, when the emotional storm settles into a cold stillness, like fog rising off a lake at dawn. In that stillness, I stopped asking questions. I didn't want to know why they thought I didn't matter, or how they justified robbing me to rescue Jake again. I no longer needed their reasons. What I needed was a plan, something surgical, clean, something that couldn't be undone with another dismissive shrug or a forced apology over lukewarm coffee and denial. So I started watching, listening, gathering details the way a predator studies its prey before striking. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. It began with a conversation I overheard purely by accident. Or maybe fate had decided I'd been patient long enough. I had stopped by my parents' place one afternoon to pick up a box of old photo albums that Mom insisted I take before she decluttered. She was in the kitchen on the phone, and I could tell by her voice, lower than usual, tinged with worry, that she thought I was still in the driveway. I hovered in the hallway, half shadowed by the open door, and heard just enough to change everything. "No, we're still behind. If we can just get the interest down again for 6 more months. Yes, the second mortgage. No, the equity's already tied up. No, I'm not asking Elena. That ship has sailed. Second mortgage, behind, equity tied up." It clicked fast, faster than I wanted to admit. They were struggling, not just short on cash struggling, but serious financial instability. The kind people wrap in polite smiles and bake sale optimism, while the walls around them quietly crumble. And that house, the same one they'd raised us in, the same one they stole my future to protect, it was becoming too much for them to manage. Whether they admitted it or not, that house was sinking them. After I left, I did what I do best. I got to work. Years in real estate meant I knew where to look, what to pull, and how to read between the lines of listing platforms and property records. It didn't take long to confirm my suspicion. Their address showed up under a private listing network. Not public yet, but flagged for quiet sale. That meant they were shopping it around discreetly, likely through a private broker trying to keep it all under wraps. They probably told themselves it was temporary, a last resort, just exploring options. But I knew what that language really meant. They were drowning and hoping for a lifeline that wouldn't cost them their pride. And that's when the idea sharpened into something actionable. I wouldn't yell, I wouldn't sue, I wouldn't even ask for the money back. No, I'd buy the house, their house, quietly, legally, strategically. And then, when the time was right, I'd make sure they understood what it felt like to be powerless inside your own walls. But there was one problem. I couldn't buy it in my name. That would blow everything. If they saw my signature on the paperwork, the deal would die in a heartbeat. I needed a layer, no, a whole wall between me and the transaction. Luckily, I had just the person to help me build it. Marcy Whitmore had been a friend since college and worked as a broker out in Round Rock. She was sharp, discreet, and owed me one from a deal I'd helped her close the year before. When I called her and explained what I needed, an LLC set up, a clean offer submitted, everything papered over with the quiet professionalism only money and experience can buy. She didn't even hesitate. "This is cold," she said on the phone, tone half impressed. "You sure you're up for this kind of move?" "I'm not doing it for revenge," I told her, and it was the truth, or part of it. "I'm doing it because I'm tired of being the family safety net while everyone else lights matches." It took less than 2 weeks. The listing broker had no idea who I was, just saw an LLC with cash to offer and a short inspection window. They bit. People like my parents, old school, stubborn, prideful, don't ask too many questions when they think they're getting away with something quietly. They didn't want attention. They wanted the stress to disappear without having to confess their mistakes to anyone. So when the offer came in from a faceless investment group offering just above market, they saw it as salvation. The sale closed in record time. Marcy handled all the communication. I signed everything with the LLC name. I never even had to step foot inside until the papers were final. And once the ink dried and the title shifted hands, I sat in my own office, alone, holding the deed to the house I grew up in. It didn't feel like victory, it felt still, like holding a loaded weapon you had no intention of firing, but knowing you could. Knowing that for the first time, you held the power, not out of cruelty, but because someone else had thrown it away when they thought you didn't need it. My parents were told the house had been purchased by an out-of-state buyer looking to convert it into a rental property. They were offered the chance to stay, for a price. A lease agreement would be drawn up, rent due on the first, no exceptions, no extensions, no special terms. They hadn't signed yet. They were still weighing their options, as if they had any. Jake, according to Mom, was going to help out. That probably meant another borrowed lie, another plan doomed to collapse under the weight of his own incompetence. I gave them until Thanksgiving. That was when I planned to present the real contract. Not the one their lawyer sent over. Mine, ironclad, specific. Cruel only in its precision. And I was going to do it at the table where they used to tell me I didn't need help. The same table where they signed away my future with a pen and a shrug. They thought I was too practical to make a scene. They had no idea I'd learned from the best. All I had to do now was wait. The house still looked the same. That's the part that surprised me the most as I pulled into the driveway that morning, the week of Thanksgiving. The bricks hadn't changed. The shutters still flaked the same tired white paint, and Mom's hanging fern was right where it always hung, as if time hadn't sunk its claws into the place. But now, standing there in front of the home I'd grown up in, the home I now legally owned, I felt like I was seeing it through entirely new eyes. Not the nostalgic haze of childhood, not the bitterness of betrayal, but a cold, focused clarity that made every window and cracked step look like numbers on a spreadsheet. It wasn't a home anymore. It was property. It was leverage. I wasn't supposed to be there that day. My parents didn't know I was in town early. They believed the buyer of the house was in California and that the leasing agent would handle everything through email and certified mail. That fiction had served its purpose well enough while I worked behind the scenes. But now, with Thanksgiving days away and my own plans in motion, I needed to ensure the pieces were lined up exactly as I intended. Precision was everything. Inside my car sat the final draft of the lease agreement. 22 pages, legally binding, reviewed by 2 attorneys, one to make sure it was enforceable, and another to make sure it felt almost but not quite cruel. The terms weren't abusive, but they were unrelenting. Rent was due on the 1st of every month, with a 3-day grace period. Any late payments would result in a late fee of 2% per day compounded. Maintenance was the tenant's responsibility, not the owner's. Lawn care, utilities, repairs, all on them. No pets, no subletting, no extended guests over 30 days. And buried 3/4 of the way in, among the legalese and fine print, was the clause I had highlighted in pale gray ink that would be almost invisible unless you were looking for it. 3 missed payments within a calendar year would trigger immediate eviction with no negotiation. This wasn't revenge for me. Not really. This was correction, a balancing of scales that had been tilted so far in one direction for so long, my family had forgotten what fairness even looked like. For years, they had operated on the assumption that my stability made me expendable, that I didn't need help, that I could take a hit and smile. But everyone has a breaking point, even the ones who never ask for anything. When I knocked on the door, my mother answered with a surprised tilt of her head, her hand still damp from doing dishes, the smell of apple cinnamon candles and bleach wafting behind her like some twisted holiday greeting card. She hadn't seen me in weeks. We'd exchanged maybe 3 phone calls since the last time I confronted her, and those were as thin and brittle as cold air. "Elena," she said, drying her hands on a dish towel, trying to summon a smile she didn't quite believe in. "You're early." "I had some business in town," I said, stepping inside without asking. "Thought I'd drop by." The house was decorated like it always was in November. Plastic pumpkins on the mantel, a cornucopia centerpiece on the table, and that same turkey wreath on the front door that had hung there since the Bush administration. It was like they were trying to conjure warmth through sheer force of repetition. But underneath the surface, I could feel the tension in the air, like humidity before a thunderstorm. Dad was in his chair, flipping through mail, and Jake, unsurprisingly, was nowhere to be found. "I brought something," I said, holding up the folder. My father looked up, skeptical, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. "What's that?" "Your lease." His brows furrowed, and then he chuckled, confused. "Our what?" "The rental agreement for this house, effective December 1st. My mother blinked, glancing at him, then back at me. "What are you talking about, Elena?" "I bought the house," I said, my voice calm, maybe even too calm. "Through an LLC. It's been finalized for weeks. I didn't want to say anything until the lease was ready, and now it is." My father stood slowly, the mail forgotten in his lap, his body stiff like he was unfolding something that had been folded too long. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." For a long moment, nobody moved. I set the folder down on the dining room table, the same table where they used to argue about bills and birthdays and whether Jake deserved another second chance. I opened it to the signature page and pushed it forward. Dad picked it up with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "This is a joke, right?" "No," I said. "This is real. You'll have 60 days to decide. Sign the lease and stay as tenants, or vacate by the end of the year." My mother's voice cracked. "Elena, you wouldn't really do this to us. This is our home." "You did it to yourselves," I said. "You sold it. You just didn't bother to ask who you were selling to." My father's smirk disappeared. His eyes scanned the lease, the smirk now gone entirely, replaced by something colder, more frightened. He sat down. He read, really read, line by line. And when he hit the clause buried in the middle of page 17, When he saw just how tight the terms were, I saw his jaw clench. "You've always been good with details," he muttered, not looking up. "I learned from people who weren't," I replied. My mother reached out, touched the edge of the folder with fingers that trembled ever so slightly. "Why would you do this?" "You said I didn't need the inheritance," I answered. "You were wrong. I needed the respect that came with it. Since you couldn't give me that, I found another way to take it back." They didn't speak after that, not for a long while. I left the lease on the table and walked out, the door clicking shut behind me. In the rearview mirror, I saw my mother still standing there, staring down at the paper like it was a blueprint for something she never wanted to build. Thanksgiving was in 3 days, and they hadn't signed yet. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived with a kind of stillness that always unsettled me, the sort of deceptive calm that blankets the world just before it decides to crack wide open. The sky was overcast, dull and stubborn, casting a gray filter over everything outside my window. I woke early, even though I hadn't set an alarm, and sat at my kitchen table drinking lukewarm coffee from a mug that still had a tiny chip on the rim from the day Jake had knocked it off the counter 6 years ago during one of his surprise visits. That usually ended with a mess and an apology he never really meant. That chip, like so many other things in my life, had lingered longer than it should have. I stared at it while my phone buzzed silently on the table, a text from my mother blinking on the screen like a stubborn notification I had no intention of answering. "Turkey's in the oven, see you at 3. I didn't respond. I just kept sipping the coffee, letting the bitter taste settle into the corners of my mouth, letting my thoughts run through every detail of the last 3 months, every lie, every excuse, every quiet betrayal that had unfolded under the worn roof of a house they had once promised would always be my home. I had spent most of my adult life trying to be reasonable, trying to be the person who didn't make waves, the one who let things go for the sake of peace. But peace, I had learned, often comes at the expense of the person who values it most. And this time, I wasn't going to be that person. When I finally pulled into the driveway just before 3, the house looked dressed for the part. Every light on, the windows fogged with the warmth of cooking and bodies and tradition. The smell of roasted turkey and sage stuffing wafted out the door the moment my mother opened it, and for a second I was hit with an almost violent wave of nostalgia, the kind that tricks you into forgetting everything wrong and remembering only the filtered, curated fragments of your past, the safe ones. But the moment passed, and I stepped inside. The table was set for 6, as it always had been. Me, Jake, my parents, my Aunt Sheila, and her husband Frank, who had been drinking bourbon out of a travel mug since noon. They were already seated when I walked in, and Jake, of course, was late. He showed up 10 minutes later in a jacket 2 sizes too big, and a Rolex that gleamed so aggressively on his wrist, I wondered who he had borrowed it from this time. He hugged my mother like a soldier back from war, kissed her on the cheek with the same charm that had saved him his entire life, and winked at me across the table like we shared some private joke. We didn't. Dinner was, at first, predictably awkward. Conversation stumbled over itself, each topic carefully chosen to avoid anything remotely real. Weather, football, a neighbor's new fence. I watched my father carve the turkey with the precision of a man who believed the ritual might somehow stitch everything back together. My mother smiled through tight lips and kept pouring wine, and every time Jake made a joke that landed flat, she laughed just a little too loud. I waited. I let them believe for one final hour that everything was still under control. When dessert came, pumpkin pie and my mother's overly sweet cranberry sauce served in her grandmother's glass bowl, I finally reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. I didn't say anything at first. I simply placed it on the table in front of my father and leaned back in my chair. The conversation stopped. The room went still. "What's this?" he asked, not touching it yet. "Your lease," I said, keeping my voice even, almost bored. He looked at me, then at my mother, who was already staring at the envelope like it might explode. Jake snorted under his breath and said something like, "Jesus, you're still on this?" But I didn't even glance in his direction. This wasn't about him anymore, not really. My father opened the envelope slowly, as if expecting to find something he didn't want to see. His eyes scanned the first few pages, then moved faster, flipping, stopping suddenly on page 17, the clause. His lips moved as he read it again and again until he set the papers down and looked at me. "You're going to evict your own parents?" he asked, and this time his voice didn't sound angry. It sounded afraid. "I gave you 60 days, I said calmly. "You've used up 28. The rent is due next week." My mother finally spoke. Her voice was brittle, almost pleading. "You really think Grandma would have wanted this? For you to treat us like tenants, like strangers?" I met her gaze without blinking. "Grandma wanted me to use the gift she gave me however I saw fit. You decided to use it for Jake. I'm using what's left of my strength to make sure I don't disappear inside your mistakes." Jake slammed his hand down on the table, rattling the cutlery. "You're a goddamn control freak, Elena. You always have been. This is disgusting." "You're doing this just to prove a point." I finally turned to him then, and I didn't raise my voice, didn't curse, didn't throw anything. I just looked him in the eye and said, "You stole from me. You let them do it. And you didn't even have the decency to admit it was wrong. You want to talk about control? You've never had to be in control of anything because someone's always been cleaning up behind you. That ends now." There was no yelling after that. No one flipped the table or stormed out. Instead, the silence that followed was worse. It settled in thick, choking the room. My Aunt Sheila stared down at her plate. Frank poured another bourbon. My mother picked up a napkin and dabbed at her eyes, but no tears came. I stood slowly, pushing my chair back without a sound, and walked to the door. Before I left, I paused in the hallway, looking once more at the house that had shaped me, betrayed me, and now belonged to me in a way that felt both poetic and devastating. "You have until December 31st, I said over my shoulder. 3 strikes, 1 missed payment, 2 more to go." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out into the cold evening, climbed into my car, and drove away, the silence from inside still ringing in my ears like a siren. That night, back in my apartment, I sat alone again at my table. I opened the last envelope Grandma Ruth had left me, the one I hadn't dared open until now. Inside was a short note in her handwriting, bunched and fading, but still strong enough to make my throat tighten. "Elena, be kind but not stupid. People will take from you if you let them. Don't let them." She had known. Even then she had known. I folded the note and tucked it into my drawer, and I didn't cry, not even once.